You are now listening to theGrio's Black Podcast Network, Black Culture Amplified.
Hi, and welcome to the Blackest Questions. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer, politics editor for theGrio and associate professor of political science at Fordham University. In this podcast, we ask our guests 5 of the Blackest questions so we can learn a little bit more about them and have some fun while we're doing it. We're also going to learn a lot about Black history, past and present. So here's how this works. We have 5 rounds of questions about us, Black history, the entire diaspora, current events, you name it. And with each round, the questions get a little tougher, and the guest has 10 seconds to get it right. If they answer the question correctly, they'll receive 1 symbolic black fist, and they'll hear this. And if they get it wrong, they'll hear this. But we still love them anyway. Our guest for this episode has been one of the most constant voices in music journalism for the past 30 years. Touré was part of MTV News. He's written for Rolling Stone, The New York Times, Vibe, Ebony. The list goes on. And he's interviewed everyone from Tupac and Jay-Z to Lady Gaga.
Thanks so much for coming out.
Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.
How are you?
Touré is also an author, a professor, a podcaster, and cultural critic. But most importantly, he's my Griot sibling. He's also got a new podcast called Being Black, the 80s. Touré, thank you so much for this special edition of the Blackest Questions. I'm so happy to see you.
I'm also somebody who's been to your parties, so I've seen where this whole sort of Chrissy asking questions thing comes from.
Yes, and I've got to let my listeners know this episode is jam-packed, so they better buckle up. Touré, are you ready to play the Blackest Questions?
Yes, I am. I was born ready.
Okay, question number 1. Wu-Tang Clan was formed in 1992 in Staten Island, New York City. The group is considered one of the most influential groups in hip-hop. Can you name every member of the Wu-Tang Clan?
The RZA, the Jizza, Ghostface Killer, Method Man, Raekwon the Chef, Inspector Deck, You God. Is that all of that 8?
We got 2 more to go, and you're missing my favorite.
No, I said Method Man.
He's not my favorite.
He's not your favorite? I said Raekwon.
That's a clue.
I expected Deck. Who did I leave out?
I'm giving you a clue.
Oh, Dirty. Dirty.
Old Dirty Bastard.
Dirty.
1 more, who joined the group in 1995.
Oh, the later one. Jesus Lord. I want to say Shaolin Monk, or who was the other one? Oh my God. He never even really made it that big. Jesus Christ.
Capadonna is the last and
Capadonna.
final member.
Yes.
And I hope our listeners understand, if you know Old Dirty Bastard's album, he has that whole thing where he does that voice thing,
Yes.
which I love. I think he's a genius. It's my favorite.
Yes.
Okay, so the group's debut album, Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers, which featured songs like Protect Your Neck and Cream, is considered one of the greatest hip-hop albums of all time.
Cash rules everything around me. Cream, get the money. Dollar bill, yo.
The album also got a 5 mic rating from The Source, which at the time was the highest rating an album could receive. Wu-Tang tracks frequently made the Billboard charts, and the group was nominated for a Grammy back in 1998 for Best Rap Album. The collective picked up its name from a martial arts film shot in Hong Kong called Shaolin Wu-Tang. So, you actually wrote a review of Enter the Wu-Tang for Rolling Stone. Tell us about that.
Tell you about that? I'll tell you about that. Wait, did I get the question or not? Because I got 8 out of 9. Is that, did I get it or not?
I'm going to let my producers decide whether or not you get a black fist.
Well, they work with me, so that's 1, right? So they're not going to say no to me. Yeah, the Wu-Tang review was one of the things that I missed, right? Like, the record sounded dirty. It sounded like undermixed, undermastered. So it sounded like and the sound had been very crisp and clean, Dr. Dre. So they're totally changing the direction. I didn't get it right away. It took time for me, and I think for a lot of people, to really get into the Wu-Tang sound and to understand who they were. Because I'm like, there's a million guys here.
I'm a member of the Wu-Tang Clan. If you think about it, it's so many people.
I mean, I didn't get it. I gave the review was more like medium rather than what I would give it now is probably a 5, because it is genius, and I think that they did subsequent things that were far more genius as far as Ghostface albums, absolutely Raekwon albums, some of the work Method Man did, on and on, Dex work, Jizza. But the first one was extraordinary, and I didn't recognize it right away.
Yeah, and that gritty sound is something that, we weren't accustomed to hearing. It sounded unfinished, unpolished. It sounded like someone's, basement. But in retrospect, I think the album holds. Obviously, my favorite Wu-Tang Clan member is Ol' Dirty Bastard. I think that his solo album is just a work of art. It's a masterpiece. I can listen to it all the time.
It does hold because they weren't in line with the way things were supposed to sound then. So it doesn't sound dated because they weren't doing the contemporary things. So they exist out of time as far as the timelessness of those records.
Now, are there any other artists who you've changed your opinion about over the years where either you were really in love with them at the time and then you're like, this is whack in retrospect, or you were a little lukewarm and now you realize, okay, they should be on someone's Mount Rushmore?
I'm not, that's interesting. I'm not really sure. I'm thinking of, nobody's coming to mind right now where I downgraded them. Like, I think once you understand somebody and you connect with them as musician and fan or critic, that's going to stay, right? Like, it may end up that was dated, but I'm not going to 10 years later, that album was actually whack, but I loved it. But somebody who I didn't get, I don't know. I'm not sure I can say.
Well,
I'm not sure what I would
me,
think of that.
I gotta say, every Outkast album that's ever come out, the first few listens, I'm like, I don't get it. It's sort of, I have to earn the listening pleasure of an Outkast album.
Around this you, your mama and your cousin too. Rolling down the strip on boats, coming up slamming Cadillac doors.
The first time I heard ATLians, I was like, what in the deuce is this nonsense? And then I think, over time, after a few listens, I'm like, this is brilliant. Same with Aquemini. I mean, all of their albums for me, I sort of have to sit with them for a short spell before I can really understand and truly appreciate them.
Some artists, some albums, we need multiple listens to understand and sort of just put everything into order in our mind. And some, hit you right away. Sometimes the more profound musical relationship will come from the thing that you didn't first understand, right? And that you had to just put in a little bit of time. Look, the first time I put on a Nina Simone song for myself, I was 22. I heard the sound of her voice. It freaked me out. I was not emotionally prepared as a 22-year-old to deal with Nina Simone, and I turned it off, right? And I came back to it a year later and was like, okay, now I can better appreciate, understand, and deal with this. It's funny because the first time I listened to De La Soul's album, 3 Feet High and Rising, their first album, I put it in, I had a little car, I put it in the car, and the first couple songs I was like, okay, all right, whatever. And then they get to the song about frogs, where the frogs were rapping back and forth to each other. And I was like, oh, this is whack. And I threw it in the back. And then a couple months later, Potholes in My Lawn came out. I was like, yo, that record's incredible. Let me give this another chance. Went in the back, dug it out, and then I was like, oh my God. And then I became a huge, gigantic De La Soul fan.
Potholes in my lawn. Everybody's saying what to do when sucker lunatics start digging and chewing.
But, at first, they threw, I was not ready. It's not them. It's whether or not we are ready.
Exactly. Okay. This record company was based in Englewood, New Jersey, and is credited with being the first label to release rap music. What is the name of this label?
Sugar Hill.
Okay, so Sugar Hill Records. The recording studio was first opened in the 1960s by married couple Sylvia and Joe Robinson and was originally called All Platinum, but changed its name to Sugar Hill Records in 1979 when it began focusing on rap music. Soon after, the label released Rapper's Delight by the Sugar Hill Gang, and the song became rap music's first top 40 hit.
Now what you hear is not a test, I'm rapping to the beat. And me, the groove, and my friends are gonna try to move your feet.
Grandmaster Flash and Furious 5, Crash Crew, and Treacherous 3 were just some of the acts that recorded with Sugar Hill. The label was eventually sold in 1986, and in 2002, the Sugar Hill building burned down, taking with it master tapes of hit songs like The Message and Rapper's Delight. So, do you remember where you were the first time you heard Rapper's Delight?
Oh, absolutely. I was in my mom's car. It came on the radio. It was so pop that it made it on to, because my mom was not into Black urban contemporary radio. She was a mom, right? But she listened to a station that had a softer. So I play Lionel Richie and Paul Simon and Wings, right? Paul McCartney's group, lighter stuff, right? But Rapper's Delight had a light feel to it that it could pop up on pop radio. I heard it on the radio in my mom's car, and I was immediately like, what is that? And we had heard songs before where there was a little rap part, right? Dizzy Gillespie, Jimi Hendrix, other people gave you a short rap part, maybe a 4, maybe a 6, right? But this was like, yo, they're still they're still going, they're still going, like, this is amazing. The form of rapping blew me away the first time I heard it. It's funny in relation to your previous question, because at the time I thought Rapper's Delight was amazing, right? Now, the innovations that quickly came thereafter was like, oh, that song is bubblegum. We're going much deeper, because I also remember being out in the park with my dad and one of his grown friends saying to me, have you heard The Message? And I was like, no, I know nothing about this song. And so I had to go find it and played it and was like, oh my God, this song is mind blowing. Like, if this is what rap is and can be, because we called it rap then, like, I'm sold.
Don't push me, cause I'm close to the edge. I'm trying not to lose my head.
And when did you know that it was that sort of hip hop was going to be a staying force?
I never looked at it that way. I never thought about, will it be a staying force? I remember my parents saying it wouldn't be, and then when Quincy Jones came out with Back on the Block, where he worked with Big Daddy Kane and a lot of other contemporary rappers, then the older folks were like, oh, this is a real thing and not a fad.
Cause I remember reading of my people bleeding, put through slavery and killed for bravery. We should have got our freedom much sooner. You never seen a black man on the honeymoon.
But it never occurred to me that it wouldn't be, that it was a fad, that it would just go away. Like, there was a culture that was clear to us in the early 80s, even though it was small. But it seemed very powerful, and you just wanted to be a part of it. I mean, I remember buying LL Cool J's radio just on the strength of the way the cover looked. I didn't know any of the songs, but I'm like, boombox,
right? That's all.
for me.
That's all it is. So wait, so this is a perfect time to talk about your new podcast, though, Being Black, the 80s, because all the episodes dropped at once, and it's a docu-style podcast. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I've been wanting to do something like this for a long time, and I'm really thrilled that theGrio gave me this chance. We're talking about Black political issues in the 80s, but also mixing in the lens of the songs of the 80s that speak to those issues. So you get a song like NWA's Dope Man, and you could talk about the crack epidemic, or a song like Public Enemy's Black Steel in the Hour Chaos, and you could talk about mass incarceration.
On the streets of situations unreal, I got a raw deal.
So we talk about the songs, and we talk about the issues that they bring up. One of the episodes goes into De La Soul's My Brother's a Basshead.
Yo, bro, got another rock for your hiking boots. Gonna make you scream and loop, re-loops. Gonna take you far on a freeway.
And this is probably the greatest song of that saying, this is how crack affected my family, but I am not a user, right? Because some people are users and talking about what it feels like for them to use, but this is like having a crackhead brother, and it's a true story, hurt me and my family. So we have producer Prince Paul talking about the making of the record.
Remember him just really being bothered. And this was, I mean, in recording the record and really expressing a lot of emotion. Like this wasn't just, the song sounds kind of lighthearted and you might poke a little fun here and there as it sounds, but it was something that bothered him.
And then you're going into the feeling of using crack and the impact of crack. And so it's very digressive and discursive, and there's a lot of sound design, and you can really sort of trace this mental journey through from one song through these social issues to sort of political history for Black people in the 80s to the destination of another song that it's very interesting, and it sort of moves in all sorts of different ways that podcasts don't usually move. So I'm really excited about this.
I'm super excited about it because there's so many issues that I think that you tackle, not just from the traditional head on, but you change this prism and you have us look at it from a different angle. You know, there's so many rap albums, obviously, that talk about selling drugs, but I love this new conversation that you're starting. Shout out to Byron Allen and all the team at theGrio for making sure my Griot sibling has an amazing new podcast called Being Black, the 80s. So be sure to check it out wherever you get your podcast. Okay, so you're doing well. You ready for question number 3?
Yes, I'm perfect so far. So let's keep going.
You know what? No competition, right? Okay, question number 3. This next question is a two-parter. So here's the first part. Who is the best-selling female rapper of all time?
Lauren.
No, the answer is
Missy.
Nicki Minaj.
No,
So
Nicki.
since arriving on the music scene in 2010, Nicki Minaj has sold more than 100 million records. She grew up in Jamaica, Queens, in New York City, and released several mixtapes between 2007 and 2009 before her debut album, Pink Friday. And earlier this year, she beat out Missy Elliott, my absolute favorite, for the longest consecutive run on the Billboard Hot 100 chart. Nicki has had a single on the chart for 14 consecutive years. Missy's record was lucky number 13 years. And so while we're talking about Billboard, let's chat about their controversial list that ranked the top rappers of all time. Nicki was the only female who made the top 10.
That I will retire with the ring, and I will retire with the crown. Yes.
She was given the number 10 spot. Jay-Z took the top spot, which I highly disagree with, followed by Kendrick Lamar, Nas, Tupac, and Eminem, rounding out the top 5. So you know I had preguntas. So do you think Nicki was in the right spot on the list? And were there any other women missing from that top 10 list that you would have liked to see?
I'll answer the first part of the question. I'm not answering the second part of the question. Well, no, Nicki's way too high. She's not top 10. That's ridiculous. It's completely ridiculous. No, she's not top 10. She can flow, but there's not anywhere near enough substance in the rhymes for her to be top 10. That's a joke. Lauren, I could make an argument for Lauren being top 10. I mean, I could see that. But I mean, some purists would say there's not necessarily enough
where's the body of
material
work?
to be top 10 as opposed to, people who are ranked higher. I mean, look.
What about Queen Latifah?
Yeah, is that a joke? I mean, like,
no, that's not a joke.
She's
on my Mount
Are you?
Rushmore.
Is that a joke? I mean, that's a joke, right?
Queen Latifah, are you?
That's not a serious.
I will
Top 10.
come through
You
the
said
screen
top
and
10.
fight you.
You said top 10. You did not say.
All right.
Is she great? She's a great MC. You said top 10.
Right. I didn't
top
say
10.
top 10.
No, that's a
yes,
joke.
okay.
That's
okay.
a joke.
Okay.
I mean, look. Let's pause here to say that misogyny in many forms that exists throughout the music industry in all genres has limited the impact that a lot of women could have, right? To say nothing of misogyny throughout society, but just I know of female artists who are saying, I'm in my sessions that I'm paying for, and men are talking down to me about my music, right? And some of that grinds women, to say nothing of what Kesha and other women have been through, right? Like Harvey Weinstein type situations, right?
Absolutely.
Like, so I am, to say nothing of, the overt masculinity of hip hop, when a lot of people are like, I'm not even going to take a woman rapper seriously, right? No matter how well she. So, I think that misogyny has been a huge barrier, right? So but that's been an issue in many genres. So I don't think that's necessarily specific to hip hop.
And I know that you're not a big fan of ranking artists based on album sales or streaming numbers. So tell our audience a little bit more about that.
Well, we should not. Here's the problem with talking about sales, right? Is that gives too many votes to white people, right? I'm not saying black people don't buy or stream music, but it's
a disproportion that skews the data.
There is a, let's say, finite number. There's a certain number of people who are serious hip hop fans who will buy something. Let's say it's 2-3 million, right? Like that's pretty much the size that a big, truly hip hop album can get to. Well, when you get to, let's say Drake, to name a name, you get 6, 7, 8 million. That's 4, 5, 6 million white people who are not, and the race is not really the issue, but they are pop fans. They are not true hip hop fans who are buying that, who are say, I love Taylor Swift, I like
Drake's sing-songy music.
I like Drake. There's nothing wrong with that. But if we're talking about the greatest MCs of all time, adding in sales means people who aren't hip-hop fans are getting too large of a vote. Because we only use sales to talk about the guys like Drake, right, who are doing 6, 7, 8 million, right? It's not going to differentiate somebody who's going gold from double platinum, right? You're not going to say the double platinum guy is better than the gold guy. Like, not necessarily.
Not necessarily. Okay,
right.
So let's go to the second part of the question, right? I told you this was a two-parter. So here's the second part. Do you know the best-selling album by a female hip-hop artist?
Why are you doing this?
Well, I want to see how misogynistic you are.
Album by a female art. Let's see. Logically, you would guess it's something from Nicki. I could not name her albums. Yeah, but Miseducation did like 10 million.
Stop
or something
there. You're
like
correct.
That. Okay.
It's
Yeah.
The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill. The album has sold over 20 million copies and was certified diamond in 2021, making Lauryn Hill the first female rapper to achieve the milestone. The Miseducation of Lauryn Hill is her only studio album. She does also have the live album, and she's released more than 20 singles. Lauryn Hill, of course, is part of the group The Fugees, which is often called one of the most influential groups of the 1990s.
Strumming my pain with his fingers, singing my life with his words.
So, would you agree that they are one of the most influential groups of the 1990s?
Are the Fugees one of the most influential? I mean, I guess they're very influential. I mean, like, there was definitely, there was a period when there was a lot of energy around how can we mix the R&B sound and the hip hop sound, right? And that's Mary J. Blige. That's the whole sort of puffy idea of things that expanded way beyond them. And there was a whole, and so the Fugees are giving you that. I mean, I would love for the music for hip hop to have more of a diasporic sound, more of the Caribbean sound that Wyclef put in. I mean, like, nobody sings like Lauryn.
And when I try to walk away, you hurt yourself to make me stay.
I'm struggling to think of somebody who brings the intellectual, political, spiritual, and, the great music like Lauryn does. I mean, Jay Electronica in that vibe. But, I mean, like, to me, when you say influential, I want to think about who are the people who came after that person. It doesn't mean they're big. It means who are the, right? Like, we were talking about Tina Turner is Beyonce's cultural mother. And as soon as you say that, you're like, oh, my God, look at Tina. And the energy, the flashy, the blonde, and look at Beyonce. And that takes nothing away from Beyonce. I love Beyonce. But, like, this is very much, just as when somebody pointed out, like, no, Prince is not from Jimi Hendrix, James Brown, and Sly Stone. He's from Little Richard. Like, oh, my God, he's Little Richard's son. He's doing an impression of Little Richard half the time. It's amazing. So do I see other groups that tried or succeeded at doing with the, I'm not sure I see that, but that does not mean the Fugees are one of the most important groups of their era.
Right. Okay, so we're going to take a quick commercial break. I have so many thoughts on that, but we can't get into it. I have thoughts on a 2 versus 3 person group, but we're going to take a commercial break. You'll have me on your podcast and we'll discuss the Fugees at a later date. We'll be right back. I'm talking to Touré, host of a new podcast called Being Black, the 80s. We'll be right back.
The 80s gave us unforgettable songs from Bob Marley, De La Soul, and Public Enemy.
I'm a black man, and I can never be a veteran.
Being Black, the 80s is a podcast docuseries hosted by me, Touré, looking at the most important issues of the 80s through the songs of the decade. A decade when crack kingpins controlled the streets but lost their humanity.
You couldn't be like no soft, smiling, happy-go-lucky drug dealer. You had to suppress that.
It was a time when disco was part of gay liberation.
It provided the information to counter narratives that were given to gay people by the straight world.
This is the funkiest history class you'll ever take. Join me, Touré, for Being Black the 80s on the Grio Black Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Okay, we're back. You're listening to The Blackest Questions. I'm with my Grio sibling, Touré. We're talking about his new podcast, Being Black, the 80s. Okay.
3
Question
points,
number-
3 questions, 3 points. I'm winning. What's
Except
the
for that-
average?
Except for that last question. I don't know. I'll have my producers run the numbers. Listen, we've had people.
I got the second part of the question, so I got 3 points.
You got the miseducation of Lauren Hill. Oh, you did. You sure did. You sure did. Okay, I'll give you that. We've had people who've had 0 out of 5 and they had a blast, and they
this is
they
fun.
promised to come back. Okay,
It's fun,
so
but I want to get 5 out of 5.
you
Let's go.
want your credit. All right, well, let's see how you do in number 4. Because as we know, as our listeners know, the questions get progressively more difficult.
I like that we're getting more progressive as we go on. I like that.
That's true. Listen, you've been in the game for a minute. I want to know your thoughts and opinions on these things. Okay, this hip-hop group was based in Los Angeles and released only one album in 1988. The group consisted of 3 brothers, one who went on to join Cypress Hill. What is the name of this group?
Are we allowed to curse?
We try not to. Just,
I really did
You don't
not
like me. That's
I did not like LA rap at that time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that there were definitely New Yorkers who were like, so we're not paying attention, and
Right.
especially if you're not getting big like Cypress, we're really not paying attention because we're New York. We look down on the West Coast.
I got it. Hey, listen, the podcast's only been so long, boo. I got to go. You ready?
No.
Here's the answer. 7A3.
I don't even know if that's a fair question.
DJ Muggs, pre-Cypress Hill
783.
days.
Oh,
DJ
DJ
Muggs,
Muggs is brother
pre-Cypress
group?
Hill days.
Oh my God, that's not even a fair question.
SCANNIE. Father's last name is Bolden, so he uses the B.
Sean Bolden and Brett Bolden made up the hip-hop trio that released just one album entitled Coolin' in Cali. They were dubbed a West Coast group, yet the brothers were from New York City. The album included tracks you may know like Drums of Steel and Hit 'Em Again.
Nobody knows these tracks, Chrissy. Did the album go wood? Oh my God, who would even know this?
It's a good lead into your podcast questions on New York and LA and various influences. So, what other hip-hop groups are out there that might not be considered some of the greats, but you think still have catalogs that are worth a listen and we should tell our audience about them?
Well, I mean, Jay Electronica is probably the name that comes to mind right away, who I think is vastly underrated in terms of a lot of hip hop heads know him and love him, but say, oh, he hasn't produced enough music to. And I think people who are not like digging in the crates type hip hop heads may not have dug into him.
Children of the calm. Oh, I must be dreaming. A lady in a nightgown, puffing, kush screaming. Signal me over. You with the waves. I sing you from the Catholic church steeple digging graves.
This is one of the extraordinary MCs of the modern era, a guy who talks about religion and spirituality, who's extremely deep in the way he approaches music. And I love his music. I loved his albums. Before his album, which we were all waiting for like 7 or 10 years or something, I had more of his music in my iTunes than a lot of rappers who had albums out. So I was like, he's produced a lot of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Who else? God, Chrissy, I mean,
Well,
go ahead.
Let's shift gears for a second because I want to talk about the West Coast sound of the 90s for a moment. So we know that Death Row Records was founded in 1991 in Los Angeles, and they released several iconic hip-hop albums. I remember blasting the tapes in my 1981 diesel car in high school. And they were part of a lot of significant pop culture moments. We remember the Sorcerer Wars with Suge Knight, for example, obviously the beef between Biggie and Tupac. Did you ever interview Suge Knight or anybody from the Death Row camp and spend a little time in Los Angeles?
Oh, look who does not pay attention to my work. Did I ever interview Suge Knight? Are you kidding?
I know this.
Next, he's going to ask if I ever interviewed R. Kelly. Yes, I interviewed Suge Knight.
For the audience.
No, you didn't. Yeah, you didn't. You didn't know. because this is a very
I've been following
traumatic
your work
story.
for a long time, sir.
that
Disagreeing
I'm
with
gonna
you
have
for
to
even
go
longer.
talk to. I have an emergency call with my therapist just to bring this story up out of the vault. It's so painful, but I'll do it for
I know
you.
this. I need to make sure our audience knows.
Do
Yes,
it for
tell us
you,
about your
Chrissy.
iconic interview.
So I was doing a story for the New Yorker on a record executive from the 70s named Dick Griffey, who in some ways was like Suge before Suge. He was huge. He was a real gangster, and he was determined to make money in the music business. He had mentored Suge. So when I'm hanging out with Dick for, many days, I kept saying, like, let's go see Suge, because he was suing Suge. Because he said that he owned 5% of Death Row from having given him seed money at the beginning. So he's like, no. And then finally he sets it up. We go over to see Suge. It's like midnight or something. I say I want to talk to Suge, and I'm trying to do the story quick. I would say I want to talk to Suge alone. I'm interviewing him. And Dick leaves. I don't know where he is. I'm in Suge's office at Death Row at midnight. It's as ominous as you could imagine. And I'm interviewing him, asking basic questions about Dick Griffey. And then finally I'm like, so what's up with the lawsuit? And he's like, what are you talking about? And I pressed the question because that's what you're supposed to do. Although if you are sitting in the enemy's lair, you perhaps should not do that. Long story short, he kind of grabbed me around the shoulders and kind of pulled me around the room a little bit. He kind of felt like a rag doll. There was a period of time where I was trapped in the room, and there was clearly a young gangbanger who looked like 5 minutes out of county or 5 minutes off the street, who was just standing there, who he's like, Suge was like talking to him, and I'm like, this guy's going to rush me, and I don't know what I'm going to do, right? And if I break only one bone tonight, then I'm ahead of the game. And then finally, we kind of wrapped that up, partly with Suge showing me this incredible, he remembered our 45-minute interview in detail, like everything that I asked and everything that he said. He repeated our 45-minute conversation because we were like going to redo the interview, but now I'm too scared to talk. And he just redid the interview all by himself. And then he's like, all right, you got your interview, get out of here. And I like ran out. It was horrible. It's very scary, but it's actually going to be part of another show that we're doing for theGrio called Star Stories that's going to come out later
Oh, I
this year.
absolutely love it.
I'm very traumatized now, Chrissy. I'm very traumatized. Can somebody bring me some tea?
And that's what we like
I'm
to
freaked
do
out.
here on the Blackest Questions. Right? No, I kid.
Bring people out.
But really quickly, before we go on to question number 5, do you think that some of the violence that we're experiencing in hip hop and in the lyrics and the music and the rhetoric is just a part of hip hop culture that's here to stay? Or do you think that there could be a cultural shift because there's so much other stuff going on that we might see sort of a return back to, conscious rappers?
You partly fall back on, like, you've seen Bay talking about hip hop is, an avatar for the community. It is a representative of the community. It's not like things are happening that are not tied to what's going on in the community. There is death and an overprevalence of guns
and drugs
in
and
our
drug usage.
In our community. And so you see that in hip hop. Now, we are seeing gun deaths in hip hop, but we're also seeing natural deaths in hip hop. Some folks perhaps are not able to take care of themselves, or maybe unwilling to see the doctor, or have hereditary health problems, all these sort of medical racism issues that we have heard about that don't escape just because you escape to another class. So, there's a lot going on, but I don't think that it is divorced from what's going on in the community. And like, these are issues that we are dealing with in the community at large. I don't think that there's a specific problem that is endemic to hip hop that I don't subscribe to that notion.
All right. Well, good to know. I can't wait to hear more about your thoughts on this on your new show, Being Black, the 80s. Okay. Question number 5. Are you ready to rock and roll?
Is that the question? Yes.
So this group has been described as Southern rap pioneers, and they had a highly successful album release in 1989, but radio stations and MTV refused to play any of the songs because of their quote-unquote violent lyrics. What is the name of this group?
Wait, because of the violent lyrics or because of the sexual lyrics?
Violent lyrics.
Oh, that would be the Geto Boys.
You are correct. The Geto Boys were a trio from Houston, Texas that eventually consisted of Scarface, Bushwick Bill, my favorite, and Willie D. The group started out with completely different members and went through a couple of switch-ups before they became the trio that stayed together for decades. The group's hits, Mind Playing Tricks on Me, and Damn It Feels Good to Be a Gangster are hip-hop classics.
Damn, it feels good to be a gangster. A real gangster-ass nigga knows the play.
So, who do you think, you know I like hot takes on this show, and you know I like putting you in the hot seat. Who do you think are some of the most influential rappers or rap groups from the South?
Oh, see, that's funny because you brought up Geto Boys. I thought you were going to put me on the hot seat by saying, can you talk about disabled rappers? I'm like, no, I cannot. Bushwick Bill is the only one I could think of. Well, Fetty Wap had one eye, but I don't know if that counts. The question is about Southern MCs.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I mean, we touched on Andre 3000. I think, who's one of the greats, definitely a top 10 all time. I think Lil Wayne is one of the top 10 MCs of all time. His talent is extraordinary. The way that he does, the flow is ridiculous.
But his use of the English language and the way he thinks about society and
extraordinary.
His lens, it's like a kaleidoscope, and I'm totally into it.
Yeah. And the way that he uses metaphor, there's a horrific trend that I hate where people do a sort of, I almost look at it like a perpendicular homonym relationship. I'm going to hang your career up like a flat screen. I'm like, that, no. Like
I call that the Rick Ross style of rapping,
well,
even though he likes to rhyme words with words.
Girl Nicki loves that, and
he's
I hate
like,
that way of doing it.
Because I'm a boss. And it's like, you're rhyming boss with boss. Thank you.
But Wayne does metaphors brilliantly.
You know what I would love, Touré?
Yeah.
I would love a sit-down conversation between Langston Hughes and Lil Wayne.
Okay.
And the use of poetry and metaphor and simile and puns. And I just think that the two of them would have had one of the most interesting conversations about expression of Black life vis-a-vis poetry.
Sure. No, that's it.
Biggie's up there too with me, but that's okay.
T.I.'s extraordinary.
Oh, okay.
Rick Ross is interesting
I
because...
wouldn't have had T.I. on my list at all.
No, T.I.'s one of the great rappers from the South, I think, without a doubt. But the Rick Ross, I want to throw in, he's fine as a rapper. This is not a great flow or a great writer, but he is the greatest music/beat picker.
I think I'm Big Meech. Larry Hoover. Whipping. Hallelujah.
Yeah, I enjoy his bangers.
He's the game, right? And I was been like, yo, if we made Rick Ross an A&R and let him pick beats for somebody else, for example, Nas, who is the greatest MC who doesn't pick great beats quite often, but he told me he does that on purpose because he wants to challenge himself. Because he's like, if I picked the illest beat, it would be too easy. So he wants to go in a harder road.
Does he want us to also focus in on his voice because we're not just absorbed by the beat?
He didn't say that, but I'm sure that becomes part of it. But it's just he just said it's a harder challenge.
Yeah, you can hide behind a great beat. We see it all the time, Jay-Z.
Yeah.
So I'm also going to say, I didn't hear you explicitly say Big Boy. You said Outkast, but is he up there for you?
Big Boy's a great MC. I think Andre is just deeper and just more philosophical and a little smarter, but I think Big Boy is great. CeeLo is an extraordinary MC. Who else do I love from the South? Jay Electronica is from the South, is from New Orleans. Who else?
Missy's from the South. Would you put her in that category?
Well, is Virginia the South?
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, I believe in a 17-state South. If you had U.S. chattel slavery, you are the South.
If Virginia's the South, then sure, yes.
Are you doing like 3-6 Mafia? Are they anywhere for you?
What?
I'm asking questions that the listeners might want to know.
I don't think the listeners want to know about 3-6. What? I thought we were doing.
I'm trying to be as
we're doing serious stuff. Now you're jokes. Now you're all jokes again. There's somebody I'm forgetting.
Texas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia.
The big. I think Atlanta is so hot in hip hop and in music in general. But I do find it interesting that DC is the only city where there's a ton of Black people and they don't have a significant hip hop community as far as artists.
Well, because
right?
they're so busy into their pots and pans music. Yes, I said it, DC listeners.
Said pots and
Go-go
pans
sounds like
music.
pots and pans. And listen, I'm a Baltimore club music aficionado. That's my base. I think it's 1,000 times better than go-go music. I know we're going to get lots of hate mail. I'm sorry, DC, but your music sounds like pots and pans from the kitchen and someone yelling.
I just think that there's a DC mindset that could be really interesting on records, and we haven't had that. And it's kind of
like going to a restaurant, seeing an amazing salad, meal, whatever, and then when you get it, it's like, all right, it's fine. It's fine.
It's fine.
It's fine. Okay, we got to move on, because before we get to Black Lightning, and before I have to change my address with all the DC people coming to New York trying to jump me, we got to chat about a couple more things, because you've just had such personal moments with so many icons. I want to just pick your brain really briefly, okay? So first, if you had to choose, give us your top 3 interviews you've ever done.
That's so hard. I've been blessed to be part of a lot of amazing situations. When Jay-Z and Nas reunited after their beef, they talked to Sway for MTV, and then they drove up the street and they came to BET and talked to me, and that was an extraordinary moment.
You think you won?
I'm always thinking I'm winning. I'm one.
You think you won?
Of course. You're supposed to. That's how it is.
I did an amazing hour and a half with Zadie Smith on my podcast Touré show, where it was just an amazing conversation about writing, and hopefully, and I think, in 20, 30 years, when there's like Zadie Smith studies at Harvard or Yale or whatever, like they'll look at this as like, here's an important source of information about what she was thinking about as a writer. I think about, the first time I had Jay-Z on at Fuse, and I had already done 5 or 6 Jay-Z interviews from Rolling Stone and MTV and other things. There was one interview that really wasn't an interview, right? Because you can learn a lot by not asking questions, where we played poker all night in the Trump penthouse up in Columbus Circle. So we're just together, and I'm like learning about him and vibing him and like seeing like who he really is. No questions asked that night, but you learn more than you could have asking a question, right? That was for the cover of Rolling Stone. So we already had this deep relationship. So he comes to Fuse. He's supposed to talk to me for 10 minutes. We get vibing and we go for 40 minutes, and they make it a show. And then every artist in the game wants the same treatment. And that's part of how we got to me and Lady Gaga, who I talked to twice. Those were extraordinary conversations. There's been a lot. One thing I would say to folks who want to sit in the chair and interview other people, when you're talking to somebody, make them feel heard. Like when they talk to me, they will feel more heard in that moment than they will all day. And that sense of feeling super heard will make people want to share their deepest secrets with you.
Gotcha. Okay, so...
See, and she was just waiting to talk.
No, you know what? I'm
she
about
was
to
just waiting for her to
face.
talk. That's not what you do. You make them feel like I'm listening to you, and not like I'm waiting for my turn to
I'm
talk.
also low-key talking to my producer about something else because you talk too much. So it's like, yes, I am listening to you. You know I'm not a fan of Jay-Z. You know that. So like,
I don't
thanks
know
for all
that,
these Jay-Z
and that
stories.
sounds crazy because
No,
do you
I'm not.
love hip hop?
And
Do you also kick puppies? Do you put the toilet paper
don't kick
on the back
puppies.
side instead of on the front side?
I do love hip hop. I don't like him for a host of reasons, and I look at Barclays every time, and I like curse his name every time I walk past it.
He doesn't own the Barclays anymore.
No, he doesn't. But he sold out Brooklyn for his like little 0.21% nickels that he got.
I mean,
but anywho,
look, we can have a very reasonable and
We
real critique of Jay-Z in his political era of life,
Yeah.
right? And the NFL stuff bothers me immensely. I mean, he basically became the counterbalance to Kaepernick and basically he did not tell Kaepernick to shut up.
No,
he
but he told
us,
rich white people,
you don't
it's
need
like,
to
oh
listen
no,
to him.
we're beyond that. Like I can settle, these like placate the Negroes.
He told us we are beyond that, right?
Well,
Which
I'm not a
made
fan.
us kind of stand down. We thought Jay-Z's on the case. He's
was
definitely
never on
not.
the case. He's a capitalist, and that's fine. You can be
Absolutely.
capitalist, but like,
Absolutely. But
don't
if,
try
we're
and drag
talking
the black
about,
community with this.
But if we're talking about MCs, we're talking about what he did on records and on stages, right? This is part of my issue with people putting Tupac in the top 5, which is insane because you're only thinking about all the stuff he did outside of the studio. If you just listen to the music, he can't be top 5. It's impossible.
This brings me to a much larger conversation, which we unfortunately don't have time to do today on the podcast. But I do want to actually get into this because there is this tension that Black people have between who you are as the entertainer and who you are in real life, right? We have this debate about the Cosby Show. Do we still watch it? Do we watch A Different World?
Sammy
right?
Davis Jr., sure.
And yes, I mean, James Brown, Jim Brown, like the list goes on and on. So while we're talking about it, what about your 2008 interview with R. Kelly?
When you say teenage, how old are we talking? Girls who are teenagers.
But 15 years later, R. Kelly's now a convicted felon. He's likely never going to get out of prison. We've heard these rumblings. I went to high school in Illinois. I heard the rumblings all through high school. You were the first person in the media to put out a copy of R. Kelly and Aaliyah's marriage certificate when she was 15 and he was 27. Why do you think it took so long for the legal system to catch up with what a lot of people knew for a long time? And how do you feel about the people who separate R. Kelly the man from R. Kelly the artist? Like, where do you fall on that?
I mean, that I don't know how you can do. I don't know how you can't be triggered listening to R. Kelly. R. Kelly's music is still available. I don't understand how you can listen to an R. Kelly and not feel triggered. I don't understand how you could listen to Kanye and not feel triggered. I don't understand how you could listen to Michael Jackson and not be triggered and not feel like this is jamming up the signal of my mind of being able to enjoy this music. But I mean, on the way to the studio, I saw somebody wearing Balenciaga and Kanye shoes. So, who knows?
Right. Huh. I mean, I'm an anti R. Kelly. Like, his music is not allowed in my home. I don't listen to it. Then someone asked me, well, then do you listen to Kelly Price or Aaliyah? And I do. I listen to both of them, but
What's wrong with that?
What'd you say?
What's wrong with that?
Right. I mean, but they, they're like, well, he created, a lot of their music and their sound. So if you're anti R. Kelly, then you should be anti.
That's a stretch.
Okay. All right. Well, I mean, I still listen to it. I'm not going to.
They sang the music. I mean, that's a stretch. I don't have to.
Now, where do you fall on, say, Michael Jackson then?
I don't listen to Michael Jackson's music anymore. It turns my stomach. I saw the documentary, and I cannot treat him in my life, in my mind, the same way that I did before. I am completely grossed out. And I'm also disappointed in myself because when he was doing his thing, and I'm not sure that I could have figured it out, but I was a major music journalist at the time. And there were whispers of there's a serious problem here. And I never took it seriously to say, let me go see. Let me knock on some doors. Let me call some people and see. And I think in general, the music journalist community heard the rumors and never did anything. And, I chief among them. And Diane Diamond was running around saying this for years. And we were like, she's a kook. And it was like, no.
Who is Diane Diamond?
She was the first person who I remember on a big scale writing books saying Michael Jackson is doing these things.
Gotcha.
And we were like, she's crazy. And it was like, nope, she wasn't. She called it. Now, I don't know what her sources were early, but she had the story. I didn't look into the story, and I am regretful of that, even though I don't know that I could have. I think that story is so behind, closed doors that, you have to be much bigger to be able to get at it.
Right. Well, hopefully in one of your shows, we'll continue to delve deeper in it because I think that, there's a lot in the Black community that we collectively just need to have a sit down. I mean, between, so many icons that we grew up with and loved, genuinely loved Bill Cosby, Michael Jackson, R. Kelly, and they were such fixtures in our community. And now
Marvin Gaye, didn't he marry someone who was 17?
Yeah. Listen, the list goes. James Brown. I mean, like when we think about rape, when we think about, how men abuse women and children, I mean, there are a lot of people that don't hold up the test of time. Okay, so we got to take a quick commercial break. Obviously, Chrissy and Touré could talk and argue and fuss and fight like Griot siblings all day long, but we'll be right back. Okay, you are listening to The Blackest Questions. I'm your host, Dr. Christina Greer. I'm here with my Griot sibling, Touré, host of the new podcast, Being Black, the 80s. It is now time for the Black Lightning Round. Are you ready, Touré? This is the round where there are no right or wrong answers. You just say the first thing that comes to your mind and your heart, and that's where we go, okay?
All right.
Favorite thing to do in New York City?
Play tennis.
What's the best way to listen to music? Vinyl record, CD, streaming, tape, 8-track?
Well, vinyl sounds best.
Okay. One catalog has to go. A Tribe Called Quest, Lil Wayne, Public Enemy.
No. No. The correct answer is no. What are you talking about?
One has to go.
No, they don't have to go. I have to speak to the manager to see why one of them has to go because I can't get rid of any of them.
Okay, well, I'm gonna get rid of Public Enemy.
What?
Yeah, I said it. Okay, best track by De La Soul, who I know you say is one of the greatest hip hop groups of all time.
I mean, it's between Biddies in the BK Lounge and probably Afro Connections at High Five.
Okay, what's one album you couldn't live without?
The old De La Soul is dead.
Okay. And the last thing, since we've got a new podcast coming up from Touré, Being Black, the 80s, what's one thing our viewers would be surprised to know about you?
He
doesn't like to argue. Really, he doesn't.
I don't. It's funny. I don't know. I don't know what y'all don't know about me. Right? Like I'm not. I mean, like if you only interact with me as far as my media, you may not know that that I play tennis all the time, and that I think about that all the time, and that's a big part of my life. Like you may not know that may come out of left field for you, but like the tennis community I grew up in was super black, right? And it's one of the blackest tennis clubs in the country, right? And it was this extraordinary situation. If I made a movie about it, you wouldn't believe it, right? But it was an amazing place to grow up, and so it wasn't just about the game; it was about the culture was there, right? And so I loved that place.
All right, I want to thank you for coming on the Blackest Questions, and I adore you. I really, I know we fuss and fight on tape and off, but I do want to just, for our listeners, so it's on record in perpetuity. I so appreciate your writing and the way you think about Black people, and not just Black music, but Black culture. You really, I don't always agree with you, but that's the beauty of your writing. It makes me think. It makes me think about what my opinions are, and I really appreciate the fact that you've been doing this for a minute, and you can tell that you really love Black people, and it introduces me to new music that I may have missed. But I really, I'm excited for your new podcast, Being Black, the 80s, and having a deeper dive.
I do love Black culture immensely, and that is at the root of so much of the work.
Yeah, I think it's the root of all of your work. Everything you touch has like a true love of Black people. So I want to thank you for joining us on the Blackest Questions today, and know that you can come back anytime, even though you drive me crazy.
I got 4 right.
You got 4
right.
The other
question was crazy.
You're in the
other
pantheon.
question was insane.
So I want to thank you for listening to The Blackest Questions. This show is produced by Sasha Armstrong and Jeffrey Trudeau, and Regina Griffin is our director of podcasts. If you like what you heard, subscribe to this podcast so you never miss an episode. And you can find more from the GRIO Black Podcast Network on the GRIO app, the website, and YouTube.
The 80s gave us unforgettable songs from Bob Marley, De La Soul, and Public Enemy.
I'm a black man, and I can never be a veteran.
Being Black the 80s is a podcast docuseries hosted by me, Touré, looking at the most important issues of the 80s through the songs of the decade.
Can I have another hit? The dope man stand up. I don't give
a decade when crack kingpins controlled the streets, but lost their humanity.
You couldn't be like no soft, smiling, happy-go-lucky drug dealer. You had to suppress that.
It was a time when disco was part of gay liberation.
It provided the information to counter narratives that were given to gay people by the straight world.
This is the funkiest history class you'll ever take. Join me, Touré, for Being Black the 80s on the GRIO Black Podcast Network or wherever you listen to podcasts.